After learning from so many professors over the last year, we thought it would be valuable to share some voices from our students and alumni about how they understood the text and the course syllabus and their encounters with it, and how they experienced the seminar style classes, which is so new for so many of them. To prepare for this touchstone, I recorded interviews with 9 of our alumni at the Yale and Columbia programs. They had a lot to say, so I'm going to keep my remarks short and really let them do most of the talking. 3 of our alumni are with us today, Shekbal, Alba Bayri, and Henry Sayu, so please think of questions you would like them to answer at the end of this presentation. So to set us up, the first thing I asked our students was to pick a text that mattered to them and teach us a little how they understood it and what it meant to them. Here I noticed 3 broad themes: readings on education, readings on self and identity, and readings on citizenship, politics, and society. Not surprisingly, students have a lot to say about education and a lot of opinions. And so here are some of the texts that they mentioned when they talked about education. I'll just note that Martha Nussbaum's Not-for-Profit was part of an F&C orientation reading, and Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed was actually a text just for an alumni pilot program that we ran last summer, but it was a huge hit among those students. So for today, we're going to feature some students talking about the trial and death of Socrates and Baldwin's A Talk to Teachers. So without further ado, here they are.
This is from the Apology. So I withdrew and thought to myself, I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile, but he thinks he knows something when he does not. Whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I am likely to be wiser than he to the small extent that I do not think I know what I do not know. And this quote was meaningful at first when I read it because it kind of revealed the character of Socrates and how humble he was, even though there were so many people kind of following him and claiming him as this paragon of a philosopher. But now that I look back to it, I kind of relate to it on a more personal level because I find that the more I learn, the more I read, the more there is to know, and the more I find that I do not know much. So I think it's important to remember that no matter where you are in the process of learning or becoming a better student, you always have much more to learn.
And Alba is with us today. Here is another student.
It's natural for us to associate like wisdom or intellect or knowledge with learning. So him saying he knows or he's the wisest the room because he knows nothing or like he knows what he doesn't know, it's kind of like, it seems like a joke at first, but it really makes sense because there's a lot of stuff we don't know as human beings. Nobody ever wants to admit that they don't know. So like admitting or like being able to admit that you don't know everything is such a, like, it really takes like a level of humility to do that I think not everybody can do. It takes like also like a level of maturity that not everybody has.
And so Alba and Mosu for speaking about the Apology, which we read in the second day of our program. And now we'll hear from 2 students on Baldwin's Talk to Teachers, which is the last day of the F&C syllabus.
With James Baldwin's text on education, he put so much emphasis on the way we should educate, the way teachers should educate. That is really important. You know, there are a lot of stuff we're ignoring. It's all about teaching the kids, teaching us today about finance, about econ, and about a lot of stuff, how we make money, but not what's the best way of living life.
And Sheikh is here with us today.
You know, sitting in a class, like they want you to be in a certain structure. They want, for example, writing to be in a certain structure. They want you to use this and that in a certain way. I mean, there's no room to really discover who you really are, your individualism. almost, right? And that's kind of, and I guess like I'm kind of like contradicting what I said earlier about like how you learn a lot in school, but in reality, school can also like undermine that and just make you almost feel like a robot and be what society wants you to be and everything. And
So above all, education as a theme is an incredible introduction to philosophy. In F&C, we use education texts in our orientation. Sometimes we'll have students stage mock debates trying to convince their TAs to major in the STEM or liberal arts fields. We'll use text to have them design their own school systems based on their philosophy of education. And I'll often use themes of education when pitching the program to students and recruiting students in the winter. The next major theme to emerge was self-discovery and identity formation. And here two texts really stood out, and that was Plato's Allegory of the Cave and Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk. So we're going to hear now from 3 alumni.
A text that mattered to me in FNC was the Allegory Cave. The reason why that text mattered to me because it demonstrated how how in society you can't like really like be a kid anymore, like being like living your own surreal fantasy. You have to like step into a real world and deal with real problems. That mattered to me because it's how like me going to college, how this like college life works instead of me like being in my parents' home, like shelter and stuff.
So Callie did what a lot of students do, take a text that's ostensibly about one thing and turned it into something else. So this text that we often think about as education, he's thinking about his own relationship with his parents and his family. And that is a theme that definitely rising seniors in high school have a lot to say about. And now 2 students on Du Bois.
Souls of Black Folk by Du Bois. I'd never read Du Bois before. Well, most of the texts and authors I'd never read before, but it was really particularly interesting because he talks about contrasting ideas, sort of being both Black and American and seeing those ideas as contrasting. And so it made me reflect a lot on my own identities and how sometimes I feel those contrasting. I was born in the Dominican Republic. And so growing up in New York City was like, I would reject the fact that I was American, but I sort of had to sit down and reflect and admit the fact that I've been in the United States long enough that I'm sort of assimilated and I can say that I'm American to some extent, but I'm also Dominican, and there's sort of some sense of that culture and identity that I've lost because I didn't fully grow up in the Dominican Republic. And so it was a really important text for me to sit down with and reflect on that identity.
And our next student is also with us here today, Henry.
The one that I found to have carried the most impact in my life post CTW would be Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk. Now that text was very influential to me personally because when I first interacted with it, I definitely was hostile to Du Bois and a lot of the assertions that he made within that text. To name a few, I think obviously like the book's thesis is essentially that there's a veil separating Blackness or the Black world and the white world, and that for one to come into themselves or come into being accepted in society, they have to like transcend that veil or something along those lines. And that was a concept that I was very hostile to at first and kind of like pushed back on, as I kind of interacted with it more. But I found that in my life post CTW, I found myself revisiting that idea of this veil and thinking that, at the time when I read it, I thought that it was completely hooey because I thought that personally through my prowesses that I had transcended this veil that Du Bois was talking about. But post CTW, I've kind of revisited this idea of a veil separating the Black world and the white world, and this idea of Black artisanship. I revisited it and kind of started to see ways in which the concept of that veil and the various other things that Du Bois was talking about does kind of apply to my life. It doesn't, hasn't all the way transformed my mindset in the sense where I agree with him, but I definitely do think that reading kind of now informs a little bit of my perspective more so than it did when I first interacted with it.
So here we had Azadi, who seamlessly adapts it to her own life and her own experience, and Henry, who really struggles with Du Bois and the meaning of the text for his life. And this is pretty common. Both of these experiences are really common. And I think that's probably why Du Bois was considered an essential text by so many of the students I spoke with. A third theme brought up questions about society, citizenship, students' place in the world. Many of the students did mention Hobbes here, but we're going to focus on Aristotle, Dewey, and King for these video clips.
Aristotle states, "It is also clear why a human being is more of a political animal than bees or any gregarious animals. Nature makes nothing pointlessly, as we say, and no animal has speech except a human being." So I feel like the fact that we as humans are the only one who can like physically like speak what's on our mind is just like really crazy. And he was saying in his writing how like because we have that one single like difference, it that's what like shaped and framed our society. And so it just made me realize how important like our voices are, like when you talk and stuff, like when you talk what's on your mind, like you're spreading ideas throughout the world, and those ideas like actually like hold like weight and value to it, because then like you never know what you can say that can influence someone else.
Dylan and I pulled up his old response paper on Aristotle, and he had actually argued almost the opposite, that voice destroyed humanity and robbed us of utopia. And so when I pointed that out to him, he said, well, now I'm a lot more responsible. I'm a lot older now, and I think about my voice and how to use it for good. So we do see a lot of ways students changing over time their interpretations of the text.
One of the readings that stood out to me was Intelligence in the Modern World by John Dewey. He said, the way he put it was that the task of liberalism is to mediate like social transitions. So like depending on the time, depending on like the point in history that you're like addressing, you can look at what the conflict was at the time and see what people want, like what people were living at the time and what they wanted to go towards. And that like transition is what you would like apply the concept of like liberalism to. I never thought like liberalism was something that could be like used as a tool or like explained in a way where it felt like it's this like tool that like is used to like for a movement or like a transition from one thing to another, not to like steal his words. I always thought about it like, oh, the opposite of like conservatism.
So taking this word that had almost no meaning to Massouf and really opening his world, his idea about what that one word liberalism means for him.
Aristotle states,
One of the readers.
Yeah, in the second text, I think I interacted with this one a little bit differently. The second text for me was letter from Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King. Now, this was a text when I first interacted with it. I was astounded because King presented the idea of nonviolent activism and getting arrested in social disobedience as something in a way that I never really considered it before. Right? He considered it that he presented it as if it was something that was positive, that was like a positive aspect of good citizenship. Because when he was responding to these, ministers and these members of the church, he kind of framed it as if, by him being arrested and allowing the law to do what it was supposed to do, which was obviously like punish him for his transgressions, he framed it as if that was him being a good citizen. And when I first interacted with it, I was like, wow, that's a really fascinating way to look at this. I actually never thought about it like this. And I kind of agreed with him. I was like, maybe he is being a good citizen. But I think my freshman year of college, we re-interacted with Letter from Birmingham Jail in one of my English classes. And I don't know what had happened within me, but when I looked at it, I was like, this is complete nonsense. I read it and I was like, this is like the most paradoxical argument I've ever heard. But I had heard it like not like less than 2 summers prior, and I was taken away by it. So I think there's an interesting little paradigm at play here with how I transformed after interacting with Du Bois versus after I interacted with Letter from Birmingham Jail.
And again, Henry is here, so I'll let you guys ask him questions about that shift for both texts for him. So many texts to choose from. I asked students if they had any advice for all of you selecting text for your syllabi. So here are some of their thoughts.
I think it's important to have these kinds of shocking texts, and not only texts that we would most likely agree with, because they kind of reveal to us how Western thought has developed over time, and how there are things that we should not like about the ancients, and how we should not take their words for what they are, but we should take them apart, critique them, and use them to analyze where we are today.
And again, Alba is here.
For professors, the text they should put on the syllabus is like basically like a text that like that's unique to them, like that found like that's like impactful to like in a way not change their lives, but like having like effect in their lives, like a moment which like they never felt, and then they can like relate to it, and then they can like read to like not only to themselves but like to the world and everybody like around them. So like not only specifically then not individually but like overall society based.
If you're gonna choose a text, like I think something that the text I think should be so good to the point where there's gonna be so many arguments and so many just like people saying that this is so, I disagree with this or I agree with this. And texts that are obviously not easy, because some of the texts that I think read at FSC, they were definitely challenging, but I feel like if you're challenged, then you grow more and everything. And
You know, we were young coming into FNC, but that didn't mean we didn't know anything. Yeah, we did know some things, you know, whether that's something we learned or something from our culture. We were coming with, even though it was a little bit, we were coming with some experience. I think it would be so amazing if professors who were to just, you know, have that surveys or, you know, asking the students, or at least asking past students. I think that would be great, of their experience, and then designing the text based on students' shared experience. And then once in a while, you know, including a text that, you know, question everything that they believe in. Because that's the way, because for me, I really hate discussions where, you know, everybody's like, oh, I agree with this, I agree with that. That doesn't take us anywhere. You know, we need someone who disagrees. We need that devil's advocate to, you know, get the discussion going. You know, challenge people. You know,
So Sheikh is here with us, and something he and other students talked about, in addition to asking you to find texts that are shocking and profound and challenging and destabilizing, they also talked about diversity of their texts. And there are a lot of opinions on this point, of course, and they don't really lend themselves easily to sound bites. But I will say that when students spoke about diversity, they primarily spoke about diversity of viewpoints and perspectives and ideas, the way that Sheikh just did, rather than necessarily the race or gender of the writers. Some students really definitely wanted to see themselves represented by the authors in the texts, and some students thought the classroom should be the focus of that diversity. Others wanted to really think about themes that were relevant to them rather than people. I will say that across the board, and I think you can see this from these 4 students, they want to debate, they want to argue with each other, with their professors, with the texts. So that's really what gets them excited. They also had some advice for you all in how to teach their texts. So I'm going to let them all kind of bombard you with their opinions and advice.
He'd always go around the table and ask, oh, how was your weekend? What'd you do over the weekend? And like, he'd remember so like small details about what you told him, about what you were passionate about. Like I told him like I like soccer, and soccer games were on the weekend. So he would ask me, and he would like, I guess he like Google the score and be like, oh, I saw like Chelsea won last week. And I'm like, oh yeah, they did. And like talk about stuff like that. Like they care more. It's more than just like a program where they're like just there to teach you, because we have like school for that. So it's like being able to like interact with the person.
In FNC, like the big difference that I enjoyed from like my classroom to like FNC, the program, was that all the students get to communicate how they feel, and like Miss Tweel didn't like push back or like say like no. She let it happen. She like sometimes redirect your words and to make a point, but she wouldn't like just throw out the window. And also like she pushed you a lot in class. Like she asked like questions that really made you think. So like even when you thought you knew the book for a second, and then she asked you another question, like it was like, wow, there's like so many different ways to think about.
When you think of a professor, you kind of think of the professor lecturing at you, whereas at FNC is very different. It's more of a conversation, and the professor is there to clarify things or pose questions, but not there to lecture you for 50 minutes. And I think that's really important because it's more student-led rather than professor-led. I think that's in the spirit of FNC.
I think it really should be a discussion amongst students. I think that he limited his commentary to pretty much just clarifying things. And, he spoke so infrequently that we were learning from one another, like, so I think that's probably the best way to go about it.
You're putting yourself at the table surrounded by these thinkers, and you are actually a thinker yourself, because you're not only because you're reading them, but you're not only reading them, you're critiquing them, you're interpreting what they're saying, and you're using your own personal history and your personal experience.
So the message is somewhat clear. Professors stop talking, yet somehow also ask deeply provocative questions that change everything the students know about themselves. If you think that's a tall order, I think the students have a lot of faith in their professors, and we saw students here talking about 4 different professors, both at Yale and Columbia, and really having that feeling like they're part of a conversation across the board. Before I turn things over to questions for those 3 alumni, Alba, Sheikh, and Henry, I want to share that we have an alumni opportunity that will be advertised this spring. It'll be advertised before our next Touchstone, so I want to make sure you're all aware of it. Those of you who will have alumni as of this spring, I hope you'll help us advertise this. Students will get a $1,000 stipend to meet about 10 times one-on-one with a writing mentor over the summer, reading some of the same transformative texts that we read in our syllabi, but hopefully different. And they'll write a paper about it. So let me close by just allowing Izadi and Henry to share what the fellowship meant to them.
So my paper for that was on Tocqueville's Democracy in America and Thoreau's Walden. I had sort of knew that I wanted to do Walden because I thought it would be a nice sort of experience to be able to sit down and reflect. I think Walden is a text that very much prompts self-reflection, and I really wanted to have that before starting something as big as college. So I really wanted to sort of know myself and my values before starting college. And I thought, reading Walden was a great way to do that. And for me, it was really valuable to have that writing experience before I started college, just because I had not been doing much writing. Like, I was just coming out of a totally virtual senior year of high school. And so most of the writing assignments I was given were not as rigorous as I would have wanted them to be. And my last rigorous writing experience before that was FNC the year prior. And so it was really important for me to sort of flex that writing muscle before going into college, where I would also have another intensive writing experience.
And here's Henry.
That experience also came at like a very pivotal time in my life. It came during the summer where like racial tensions and tensions in America in general were like really at a fever pitch. And I was just, kind of like sitting here. This was like one of those, this was like when COVID had just, came about also. So I was just sitting here all summer. I had an internship that had just got canceled. So I'm sitting here at home, had nothing really to do. And here comes along Stephanie, and she's like, hey, Henry, you should be a Teagle Fellow. I'm like, oh, great. This is the opportunity I'm looking for, right? So I have all these like thoughts that are going through my head about the world around me. I was feeling kind of like unmotivated at the time, if I'm being real, to like really write things down for myself, because that's something that I kind of used to do frequently. I wouldn't call it journaling, but I would just kind of call it reflecting, I guess, about the world. But when I was presented with the opportunity to partake in the Teagle Fellowship, it gave me like a chance and a reason to really sit down and unpack what was really going on in America at the time. And after scouring the media, talking to my family and, the different things that people thought were relevant. I ended up settling on writing about this conversation that was happening about the time about symbolisms about white supremacist and racist symbolisms in America, particularly like in the statutes and various monuments that are spread out around the country. So I ended up trying to unpack that a little bit. But I think the opportunity that presented to me was monumental because it gave me a reason to like turn my brain back on after it being off for so long.
So I really hope you'll help us advertise the Teagle Humanities Fellowship when that call comes out.